The hum of the dropship was low, but constant, like a giant heartbeat that refused to stop. Private Elias Cade sat at the very back, pressed against the cold metal wall, his gloved hands tightening around the straps of his seat. Every time the ship shuddered, he felt the vibration run through his boots, into his bones. Around him, the other members of Unit Zephyr moved with the casual ease of soldiers who had seen too many battles. They were not human. They were not even remotely like him. Each one towered over him in height, bulk, and confidence. Their armor gleamed under the dim red lights of the troop bay, every dent and scar telling a story Elias could only imagine. The closest to him was Sergeant Vroon, a massive reptilian warrior with emerald scales that shimmered faintly in the artificial light. His armor was thicker than the hull plating on some small ships, and his claws tapped against his rifle in a slow, relaxed rhythm. He noticed Elias staring and tilted his head, his golden eyes narrowing. "You sure you're ready for this, human?" Vryn's voice was deep, gravelly, and carried the faint hiss of someone who didn't speak. Standard as their first language, Elias tried to keep his voice steady. "Ready enough." The answer drew a rumble of laughter from across the bay. Corporal Hithra, a slender, insectoid sharpshooter with long curved antennae, clicked her mandibles in amusement. "Ready enough," she repeated, mocking the words. "We'll see if ready enough keeps you alive when the Drath warforms start cutting through our lines." Elias didn't reply. He wasn't here to win their respect with clever comebacks. He was here because the Alliance command had ordered him to be here, though everyone seemed to know it was just for observation duty. That was the polite term for what the squad really thought of him, a tag-along mascot from Earth, Captain Seer. The unit leader stood at the front, tall and thin, with a chitinous exoskeleton that glistened like black glass. Her movements were precise, controlled, the kind of discipline that came from decades of military service. She didn't look back at Elias. She didn't need to. She already knew who her weakest soldier was. The mission briefing had been clear: land on Drados 4, fight through hostile lines, and disable a planetary siege cannon before it could fire on the Alliance fleet in orbit. Unit Zephyr had been chosen because they were one of the few squads with a record of pulling off impossible missions. Elias wasn't sure why they had added him to that record. The dropship jolted suddenly, and the low hum became a deep roar. Through the narrow viewing slit above his seat, Elias caught a glimpse of the world below. Dratos the Fourth was a nightmare painted across the stars. Black rock stretched for miles in all directions, broken only by rivers of molten lava that glowed like wounds in the earth. Electrical storms raged in the distance, throwing jagged white light across the landscape. Above it all, the enemy fleet hung like dark steel predators, their angular ships forming a net around the planet, approaching drop zone. The pilot's voice crackled through the comms. The squad moved as one. Hithra checked the scope on her rifle. Viron slammed a fresh power cell into his heavy weapon. Seer unfolded a thin holomap from her wrist device, its glowing blue surface displaying the jagged terrain and enemy positions. Elias fumbled with his helmet seals, trying to lock them into place. His hands were sweating, and the gloves made his fingers feel clumsy. "Breathe, human," Viron rumbled, not unkindly. "You'll need steady hands where we're going." Elias nodded, though he wasn't sure if it was reassurance or warning. "Captain," Seer's voice cut through the noise. "Primary insertion point, 200 meters from the siege cannon's base. Resistance will be immediate. We breach fast, destroy faster. Extraction window, 20 minutes. The rest of the squad responded with short affirmations. Elias stayed silent. The ramp lowered with a heavy hiss, and heat rolled inside like a living thing. The air smelled of metal and ash, a scent that clung to the back of Elias's throat. The light outside was dim and red, filtered through the thick clouds that choked the sky. The first to step out was Viron, his heavy boots sinking into the black dust. He moved without hesitation, scanning for targets. The others followed in quick, practiced order. Elias's turn came last. The moment his boots hit the ground, the heat hit him like a wave. Even through the armor's thermal dampeners, he could feel it creeping in. The ground vibrated faintly, not from the storm above, but from something deeper, mechanical, alive. They had only moved 20 meters when the first shots came. Plasma bolts tore into the ground, sending up sprays of molten rock. The enemy warforms emerged from the haze, 8-legged machines with armor like polished bone, glowing blue eyes scanning for targets. Their weapons pulsed with energy, the air sizzling with every shot. Contact, HFY shouted, dropping to one knee and returning fire. Varen swung his heavy blaster and cut down one of the warforms in a burst of molten metal. Seer moved like a blade, weaving between cover and directing the squad's counterattack. Elias dove behind a jagged rock, heart hammering. He raised his rifle, fired twice, missed both times. "Stay down, human," someone shouted over the comms. "Don't get in the way." He bit back the urge to reply. They were right. Right now, he was just trying not to get in the way. But deep inside, under the fear, something else stirred. He didn't know it yet, but this battle would change everything. The heat from Drados IV's surface rose like a living thing, pressing against Ilias's armor until it felt heavy. The sky above was a swirling mess of dark clouds, split open now and then by bursts of white lightning. The ground was uneven and jagged, littered with shards of black stone that gleamed in the dim light. The squad spread out in a practiced formation. Captain Seer moved at the front, her black glass exoskeleton glinting faintly. Sergeant Vrun took the left flank, his heavy weapon already tracking the horizon. Corporal HFY moved to the right, her long insectoid body, low and quick, antennae flicking as she scanned for hidden movement. Elias kept to the rear, doing his best to match their pace. His boots crunched on the sharp rock, each step sending tiny echoes across the field. His rifle felt heavier than it had on the dropship, and every time he adjusted his grip, his gloves slipped slightly with sweat. 200 meters, Seer said over the comms. Her voice was calm, precise, maintained visual contact, no stray movements. They moved forward, weaving between jagged outcroppings for cover. The siege cannon's massive silhouette loomed in the distance, a black spire rising out of the ground, its surface crawling with red energy lines that pulsed like veins. Even from here, Elias could feel a faint vibration through the soles of his boots, as if the weapon itself had a heartbeat. A sharp tone buzzed in Elias's helmet. The squad's motion sensors had picked something up. Movement. 3 o'clock, HFY said. Vrun's voice followed a second later, low and certain. Not just movement. They're waiting for us. As if on cue, the air ahead shimmered, and the enemy appeared. 8-legged warforms stepped out of the haze, their armor a pale, bone-like white. Their heads were shaped like spears, and their glowing blue eyes moved with unnerving precision. Mounted along their backs were plasma cannons that hummed with deadly power. "Contact," Seer ordered. "Engage." Viran opened fire first, his heavy blaster roaring as bright bolts slammed into the nearest warform, shattering part of its leg. It stumbled, shrieking in a high-pitched mechanical wail before collapsing into the dust. HFY's rifle barked in quick sharp bursts, each shot precise. Her bolts punched clean holes in another warform's neck joint, dropping it instantly. Elias raised his rifle and aimed at the closest one he could see. He fired twice. The shots went wide. The warform turned toward him, its glowing eyes narrowing. A sudden stream of plasma hissed past his head, close enough that he felt the heat through his helmet seals. He dropped to his knees behind a rock, heart pounding, hands shaking. "Keep your head down, human," HFY shouted. The squad pushed forward under heavy fire. Seer darted from cover to cover, moving so fast her shape blurred against the black rock. She leaped onto a low ridge, drove a blade into the weak point of a warform's armor, and kicked it free before it exploded. Vran was like a walking fortress, absorbing fire on his thick armor while his blaster roared. Elias tried to follow, but every time he moved, plasma fire forced him back into cover. The ground around him sizzled where the bolts struck, spraying molten rock into the air. The squad finally broke through the first wave, leaving smoking wreckage behind. The air stank of scorched metal and burning oil. Sci-Fi checked the terrain. Ahead, 150 meters. We're ahead of schedule. Move. They pressed on, stepping over twisted enemy remains. The siege cannon loomed larger now, its surface alive with glowing lines of energy. Smaller defense turrets jutted from its base, tracking slowly like watchful eyes. A distant rumble made Elias glance up. Through the clouds, dark shapes moved. Enemy dropships. They're bringing in reinforcements, Vern growled. We'll be inside before they land, Seer said firmly. They were halfway to the cannon when the ground beneath them shook violently. A massive shell slammed into the rock nearby, sending a shockwave that threw Elias onto his back. By the time he scrambled up, he saw where it had hit, right next to Vran. The sergeant's armor was cracked, smoke rising from the fracture lines. He staggered forward, dropped to one knee, then fell face first onto the ground. Vren's down. Hithra's show. The ridge gave them cover, but only barely. The air was thick with smoke and heat, the hiss of molten rock mixing with the deep thrum of the siege cannon's core. Elias crouched beside Vran's unconscious form, trying to block out the noise. But the battlefield refused to be ignored. Everywhere he looked, the enemy moved. The eight-legged warforms stalked forward, stepping over their own destroyed units without hesitation. Plasma bolts cut through the air in blinding streaks, slamming into stone and sending up showers of sparks. The smell of burning metal was so strong it made Elias's stomach turn. Captain Seer didn't waste time. Hithra, suppressive fire on the right flank. Cade, with me. Elias looked at her, startled. Me? Her black glass eyes fixed on him. You know, the vents. You make the throw. I'll clear you a path. He swallowed hard, but nodded. His hands were already sweaty inside his gloves. He checked his belt. One plasma grenade left. The last. Resort.Sci-Fi stood, her movements sharp and fast. Hithra, now. The insectoid sharpshooter opened fire, her precision shots hitting turret after turret. The enemy warforms turned toward her, giving Elias and Seer the opening they needed. Move, Seer ordered. They broke from cover, running low and fast. The ground was uneven, jagged edges catching at Elias's boots. Heat radiated from the vents ahead, the glow pulsing brighter as the cannon prepared another charge. Plasma bolts tore past them. Seer moved like a shadow, darting between rocks, drawing fire, toward herself. Elias followed, his heart pounding, so loud it drowned out everything else. A warform appeared ahead, blocking their path. It was massive, its armored legs dug deep into the ground. Its back-mounted cannon swiveled toward Elias. Before he could react, Seer leaped, her blade flashing. She slashed through one of its legs, spun, and drove the weapon into its neck joint. The warform collapsed in a burst of sparks, clearing the way. Go, she barked. Elias ran the last stretch alone. The vents were right there, glowing, hissing, hot enough to make the air shimmer. He yanked the grenade from his belt, thumbed the arming switch, and hesitated for a single heartbeat. A plasma bolt struck the ground just behind him, knocking him forward. He stumbled, caught himself, and threw the grenade with every ounce of strength he had. It disappeared into the vent's darkness. A second later, the explosion roared. The vent spat fire and smoke, the glow inside shifting from steady red to a dangerous white. The cannon's hum grew louder, higher, until it became a strained whine. Elias turned to run, but the shockwave from the overheating reactor slammed into him like a wall, throwing him off his feet. He hit the ground hard, his helmet cracking, against the rock. For a moment, the world spun. Elias, Seer's voice cut through the haze. He blinked, vision clearing enough to see her running toward him. Behind her, the cannon's energy veins pulsed wildly, sparks and flames erupting along its surface. Seer grabbed his arm and pulled him to his feet. Move, it's going critical. They sprinted back toward the ridge. Plasma fire followed them, but now it was wild. Scattered, the enemy was in disarray. The overheating cannon sent bursts of energy into the ground, shaking the battlefield. When they reached cover, Hithra was already pulling Vron toward the extraction point. "What happened?" she demanded. "The vents are gone," Seer said. "The cannon won't hold." As if to prove her right, the black spire shuddered. The high-pitched whine became a scream. In a blinding flash, the weapon's core tore itself apart. The shockwave flattened everything within 200 meters. Enemy warforms crumpled. Turrets melted. The ground itself split, lava spilling into the cracks. Elias lay on his back, chest heaving, watching fragments of the cannon fall from the sky like burning snow. "You're still alive," Hithra said, antennae twitching. Her voice carried a strange mix of disbelief and respect. Seer crouched beside him, her black glass eyes unblinking. "You were the weakest, Cade. Today, you were also the sharpest." Elias wanted to answer, but all he could do was nod. His ears still rang, his hands still shook, but inside, beneath the exhaustion, a spark of pride began to burn. Far above, the enemy dropships hesitated, their formation breaking. Without the cannon, their control over the battlefield was slipping. The squad had a chance now, and for the first time since landing on Drados 4, Elias felt like he was truly one of them. The blast from the siege cannon's destruction still echoed in Ilias's ears. Every breath burned in his lungs. Every muscle screamed from running and carrying Vron's weight earlier. The air was a mix of hot metal, smoke, and ash. But there was no time to rest. Above the battlefield, the sky churned with enemy dropships. Their dark silhouettes moved like vultures, circling over a dying prey. Lightning flashed behind them, throwing their sharp outlines into stark relief. Captain Seer crouched on the ridge, scanning the horizon through her visor's filters. "The cannon is gone," she said, "but the Drath will not retreat. They will come harder now. We need to move before they surround us." Corporal Hithra adjusted her rifle scope. Movement to the east. 4, maybe 5 squads of warforms. They're spreading out. Vron groaned faintly where he lay against the rock. His armor was scorched, one side dented inward from the earlier blast. Elias knelt beside him, checking the small status panel built into the armor. The readout flickered but confirmed he was stable, if unconscious. Elias looked up at Seer. "We can't move him fast. Not with all that fire coming our way." Seer's voice was calm, but her words were sharp. "Then we hold until we can. Cade, Hithra, set up defensive fire lines. We keep them back." The rookie nodded and moved with Hithra, who tossed him an extra energy cell without a word. Her mandibles clicked faintly, maybe irritation, maybe focus. Together they positioned themselves behind jagged stone outcroppings, giving them a narrow field of fire. The ground trembled. From the swirling heat haze ahead, the Drath warforms emerged, dozens of them. Their pale, bone-like armor gleamed faintly in the light of the lava rivers. Their glowing blue eyes locked onto the squad, and their cannons began to hum. "Hold," Seer ordered. The hum built into a roar. The first volley of plasma streaked toward them. Bolts slammed into the rocks, exploding into sprays of molten fragments. The heat made Ilias's faceplate fogged slightly, but he didn't move. Now, Seer's voice snapped like a whip. Hithra fired first, her shots precise, punching holes through joints and optical sensors. Elias followed, squeezing the trigger in controlled bursts. One warform collapsed under his fire, its legs twitching as it fell. The enemy advanced, climbing over their own dead without pause. VRRN stirred again, groaning. Still alive. His voice was low, strained. Stay down, Elias said quickly. We've got it covered. The sergeant gave a faint, humorless chuckle before closing his eyes again. The battle became a rhythm. Fire, reload, duck. The heat, the noise, the smell of burning armor and rock blended into a haze. Elias felt his fear turn into something else, a cold focus. He no longer thought about how small or weak he was compared to the others. He thought about sight lines, reload timing, angles. One warform broke through on the left, charging toward their position. Elias swung his rifle toward it, firing rapidly. The shots staggered it, but didn't stop it. It raised its cannon, then its head exploded in a spray of sparks as Hithra's shot took it down. Watch your flank, human, she called, though there was less mockery in her tone than before. Seer's voice came over. 2 minutes until we move. Hold your ground. Elias gritted his teeth and kept firing. His arms ached, his shoulder burned from the recoil, but he didn't stop. Every shot counted. Every second they held meant Viron had a chance to be pulled out alive. The warforms began to falter. Not many were left standing, but the rumble of approaching dropships told Elias this wasn't the end. Sci-Fi made the call. Fall back to the extraction point. Hithra, take point. Cade, you're on V. Elias moved quickly, kneeling beside the unconscious sergeant. Sorry, big guy, he muttered, hooking his arms under Vron's again. His muscles protested instantly, but he forced himself up, dragging the reptilian's heavy body across the rough ground. The heat from the lava flows grew more intense as they moved toward the extraction zone. Plasma fire chased them, bolts striking dangerously close. Hithra's voice was tight. We've got more incoming from the north. They'll cut us off. Seer didn't hesitate. Then we break through before they close the gap. Ili's legs burned with effort. His grip on Varen was slipping. Every step felt slower than the last. But the sight of the extraction beacon ahead, a faint blue shimmer through the smoke, kept him moving. A plasma bolt struck the ground just to their left, throwing up a spray of molten stone that burned across Elias's armor. He hissed in pain, but didn't stop. Another bolt hit the ridge behind them, and part of it collapsed, blocking the path they had used to enter. There was no going back now. Finally, they reached the beacon. The dropship descended fast, its engines kicking up a storm of dust and ash. The rear ramp lowered. Sci-Fi and Hithra leaped aboard first, covering the area with their weapons. Elias hauled Vron up the ramp with the last of his strength, collapsing beside him once they were inside. The ramp closed. The dropship lifted away, banking hard as enemy fire streaked past. Elias lay on the cold deck, chest heaving, sweat dripping into his eyes. He turned his head toward Vren, whose breathing was steady now. Seer moved to stand over them, her black glass eyes studying Elias. You held, she. The dropship's engines rumbled as it cut through the thick clouds of Vulcar 3's upper atmosphere. Inside, the squad sat in tense silence. The only sounds were the hum of the ship and the occasional beep of medical scanners monitoring Vron. Elias sat on the floor near the med pod helmet, resting beside him. Sweat clung to his hair, and his hands still shook faintly from the fight. His muscles ached, but it wasn't the physical pain that held his thoughts. It was what he had seen in the Drath's eyes. Cold, relentless, almost certain, Captain. Seer stood near the cockpit door, speaking quietly to the pilot through her comlink. Her tall, insectoid frame was perfectly still, but her antennae twitched, a sign Elias had learned meant she was uneasy. Finally, she turned to the squad. We're not heading back to the fleet, she said. Her voice was calm, but the weight in it made everyone look up. Command has new orders. We're going straight to Outpost Corin. Hithro's mandibles clicked sharply. That's suicide. The Draft fleet will be there within hours. Seer nodded. Exactly why we're going. Outpost Corin has the last intact planetary defense grid in this sector. If the Drath take it, they'll have orbital control over every human and allied colony 450 light-years. Cade frowned. We're just one squad. What are we supposed to do against a fleet? Elias stayed quiet, but his chest tightened. He knew the answer before Seer gave it. We're not fighting the fleet, Seer said. We're making sure the defense grid stays online long enough for reinforcements to arrive. If we fail, this planet, and maybe this whole sector is gone. The silence that followed was heavy. Even Hithra didn't argue further. The dropship jolted as it broke through the last layer of atmosphere, revealing the landscape below on the forward view screen. Outpost Corin sat like a lonely fortress in the middle of a vast volcanic plain. Black rocks stretched in every direction, with glowing rivers of magma cutting jagged paths toward the horizon. The defense grid's towers stood tall around the outpost, each crowned with emitter arrays that shimmered faintly in the heat haze. But even from this distance, Elias could see movement, small, dark shapes swarming toward the base. Drath, ground, units. The pilot's voice crackled over comms. We've got less than 10 minutes before enemy air cover arrives. You'll have to drop in fast. Seer moved to Veron's medpod. The sergeant's eyes fluttered open, still groggy. We're not done yet, are we? He rasped. Not even close, Seer replied. Think you can stand? Vren gave a slow, pained smile. If I can shoot, I can stand. Minutes later, the dropship hovered just above the outpost's southern wall. The ramp lowered, and the heat from the volcanic plain washed over them, like an open furnace. Move, Seer ordered. The squad leaped down one by one, landing on the blackened stone. Ilias's boots hit hard, the shock traveling up his legs. He immediately took cover behind a supply crate as plasma bolts streaked past from enemy positions beyond the wall. Cade and Hithra returned fire, their shots echoing sharply against the rock. Viren, despite the damage to his armor, set up his heavy repeater and began hammering the enemy line with steady bursts. Elias scanned the battlefield. Something felt wrong. The Drath were pressing the outer wall, but their attacks were oddly uneven, like they weren't trying to break through. Yet, then it hit him. They're not here to take the wall, he said into comms. They're stalling. Seer glanced toward him mid-fire. Explain. Elias pointed toward the distant ridges. If I were them, I'd keep us busy out here, while infiltration units go for the control core. The towers mean nothing if they can disable the grid from the inside. Hithra gave a short laugh. Human, are you suggesting you can read a Drath battle plan? Not suggesting, Elias shot back. I'm saying it's already happening. Seer didn't waste a second. Cade, Hithra, hold the wall with Viron, Elias, with me. They broke from cover, sprinting toward the central control structure. The heat shimmered off the walls, and the smell of burning metal and dust filled the air. Inside, the corridors were eerily quiet, until a sudden burst of motion came from the shadows. Two Drath infiltrators lunged forward, their armor dark and angular, built for stealth. Elias fired instinctively, his first shot glancing off armor, the second finding a weak point at the neck joint. The Drath collapsed, but the other was already on Seer. She parried with her forearm blade, sparks flying, but the infiltrator pressed hard. Elias's pulse pounded in his ears. Without thinking, he grabbed a fallen pipe from the floor and swung hard, smashing it into the Drath's head. The alien staggered just long enough for Seer's blade to cut deep. When it was over, Elias stood breathing hard, pipe still in his hands. Seer's black glass eyes studied him for a moment, unreadable. Then she simply said, "Good instincts." They pushed deeper into the control core, finding the main terminal room. 3 more Drath were already inside, working to override the system. Elias didn't think he acted. "Cover me," he shouted, diving toward the nearest console. He slammed a lockdown command on the manual panel, then yanked the power conduit from its socket. The The room lights flickered, and the Dreth's hack stalled. Seer finished the last of them with precision strikes, then turned to Elias. "You just bought us time." Outside, the sound of heavy gunfire grew louder. Reinforcements from the fleet would arrive soon, but they had to hold until then. As they moved back toward the wall, Elias felt something he hadn't before, the eyes of the squad on him, not with doubt, but with a spark of respect, and for the first time, he began to believe he wasn't just surviving this war, he was becoming someone who could change it. Asterisk, the sky above Outpost Corin turned red, not from the sun, but from the first volley of plasma fire, as the Drath fleet broke through the upper atmosphere. The defense grid's towers lit up, firing thick beams of white energy into the sky, striking the enemy ships one after another. From the wall, Elias could see them dark. Dagger-shaped cruisers descending in tight formation, their armor reflecting the glow of the volcanic plains. For every Drath ship that burned, 2 more appeared behind it. Cade's voice came through, "Comes tense." "They're not holding back this time." Seer stood tall, antennae twitching as she scanned the battlefield. "They mean to crush us before the fleet arrives." A deafening boom shook the wall as one of the defense towers took a direct hit. The upper section exploded into molten fragments, raining down on the outpost below. Elias shielded his eyes from the glare. "That's Tower 6, Hithra shouted. "If they take 2 more, the shield perimeter will collapse." Elias gripped his rifle tighter. He wasn't the strongest, fastest, or most skilled fighter in the squad, but something about the pattern of enemy fire made his mind start working. He watched how the Drath ships moved in the sky. There was rhythm in their attack, almost like a drumbeat. "They're testing for weak points," Elias said, more to himself at first. Sci-Fi heard him. "Explain." "They're hitting the same spots in sequence," Elias said quickly, pointing at the burning towers. "They're trying to overload the shield generators in a specific pattern. If they succeed, the shield won't collapse evenly. It'll tear itself apart from the inside." Vern's voice crackled over, comes from his heavy repeater position. "Can we stop it?" "Maybe," Elias said, mind racing. "But not by shooting faster. We need to break their pattern." Seer's gaze sharpened. "How?" Elias took a deep breath. "Redirect the tower's fire manually. Make them shoot at unpredictable intervals and at targets the Drath aren't expecting. If we can mess with their targeting rhythm, they'll have to reset their whole attack plan." Hithra scoffed. "That requires someone inside the control core during bombardment. You'd be a walking target." "I'll do it," Elias said without hesitation. Seer stared at him for a long second. "You could die." "Better me than all of us," Elias said quietly. Without another word, Seer tapped her come. "Vrin, Cade, Hithra, hold the wall. Elias, with me." They sprinted back into the outpost, the ground trembling under the bombardment. The control core was dim now, the air thick with smoke from earlier fighting. Elias slid into the main console seat, hands moving over the manual override controls. The targeting systems were designed for precision and efficiency, not chaos. But chaos was exactly what he needed. "I'm in," he said, fingers flying. "Tell the wall teams to brace for irregular fire." Outside, the towers began firing in strange, jagged rhythms. One would fire twice in quick bursts, then pause completely. Another would shoot across the sky at a random cruiser, instead of the one directly attacking it. The beams crisscrossed unpredictably, forcing the Drath ships to scatter and regroup. The sky became a storm of light and motion. Cade's laugh came over Combs. "It's working. They're breaking formation." But the Drath weren't retreating. They adapted fast. Elias saw it on his display. Smaller strike craft began peeling, away from the main fleet, diving straight toward the outpost. "They're sending bombers," Elias said. "They're going for the control core." Seer's blade snapped out with a metallic hiss. "Then we hold them here." The first bomber smashed into the outer wall, dropping troops into the courtyard. Elias could hear the roar of plasma rifles and the clash of close combat echoing from outside. He locked the last targeting sequence into place, then grabbed his rifle. The console flickered behind him, still firing on his unpredictable pattern. "Done," he said. "Let's move." They charged out of the control core and straight into chaos. The courtyard was a battlefield. The sky above Outpost Corin had turned into a battlefield of fire and steel. Plasma streaked across the volcanic air like falling stars, and the ground quaked with each strike. Elias crouched behind a scorched barricade, watching the massive Drath flagship slowly descend from orbit. Its hull was black and jagged, almost alive in the way it shimmered under the firelight. Smaller escort cruisers darted around it, creating a swirling storm of destruction above the outpost. Captain Sear's antennae twitched nervously. "This is it?" she said. "We hold here, or we fall." Vrin's breathing was steady now, but his armor still bore the scars of the earlier fight. "Then we fight," he rasped, gripping his heavy repeater with a renewed determination. Hithra's mandibles clicked sharply. "They're trying to overwhelm every tower. If the flagship lands its strike, the grid will fail completely." Elias took a deep breath, scanning the battlefield. The chaotic pattern he had set earlier was holding some of the smaller cruisers at bay, but the flagship's presence changed everything. Its energy readings were off the charts, and the way it hovered above the outpost made him feel small and insignificant. But beneath the fear, a spark ignited. Elias remembered the drill. He had watched the enemy carefully during every engagement, the way their ships moved, the way their plasma discharge patterns shifted in response to human tactics. And now, staring at the flagship, he saw it, a faint rhythm, almost imperceptible. In the energy surges from its weapons bay, "It has a pulse," Elias said, pointing at the readouts. "It's not continuous. There's a moment between volleys, a split second, but it's enough." Sear tilted her head. "A weakness." "Yes," Elias said, heart pounding. "If we can synchronize the towers to fire at exactly the right time, we can overload that pulse and create a feedback loop. It could take the flagship out without risking the towers themselves." Vrin's eyes widened behind his helmet. "That's insane." "Insane works," Elias said quietly. Sear didn't hesitate. "Then we do it. Hithra, you maintain suppressive fire on the flanks. Viren and Cade, cover the towers. Elias, you coordinate the core sequence." The young human nodded, stepping toward the main console. His fingers flew across the manual override panels, recalibrating the towers to fire in a precise pattern. Each command required timing down 2 milliseconds. One wrong move, and the flagship's weapons would target the towers instead. Outside, the flagship's pulse grew louder. Elias felt the vibrations through the floor. It was a living machine, and it knew it was being challenged. "Almost there," he muttered, sweat streaming down his face. His arms burned from holding the panels steady, eyes fixed on the fluctuating energy lines of the flagship. "Incoming boarding pods," Hithra shouted. Small Drathcraft descended from the flagship, dropping troops into the courtyard. Elias didn't flinch. Now, he pressed the final override. The towers roared to life in perfect unison. Pulses of energy fired toward the flagship, striking its weapons bays in a rhythmic, alternating pattern that matched the tiny pauses in its pulse. The effect was immediate. Sparks exploded along the flagship's hull. Its massive weapons systems overloaded and shut down with an eerie, high-pitched scream. The smaller cruisers hesitated, confused by the sudden feedback in their formation. "Keep firing," Sear shouted. Elias watched, heart racing, as arcs of energy danced across the flagship's surface. Smoke began pouring from the bays. A loud tremor shook the outpost. Then, with a blinding flash, the flagship's main hull ruptured. It teetered for a heartbeat, then collapsed into the lava plains below, sending shock waves that toppled a few enemy cruisers. The battlefield fell into stunned silence. Plasma fires still streaked from the remaining units, but the fleet had lost its heart. The remaining Drath forces were retreating, disorganized and shaken. VRRN let out a low, victorious growl. By the gods! The human did it. Seer approached Elias, her black glass eyes unreadable at first. Then she spoke quietly. You were the weakest, Cade, and yet, you just saved this entire outpost. Elias couldn't respond immediately. The adrenaline still surged in his veins, his chest heaving, his hands shaking. He glanced at the fallen enemy, the burning flagship, the battered towers still standing, and for the first time, he understood. Strength wasn't always about size or skill. Sometimes it was about seeing what no one else could, taking the risk, and acting when it mattered most. Hithra's mandibles clicked softly. Human, you're full of surprises. Even Vrun gave him a faint, grudging nod. The squad looked out over the plains, where the enemy ships retreated in disorder. The towers, battered but operational, still shone with faint energy. The outpost had survived, and so had humanity's reputation. Elias finally allowed himself to smile. The weight of fear and doubt that had pressed on him for weeks felt lighter. Now, almost gone, Sci-Fi turned away, antennae twitching with satisfaction. Prepare for evac, she said. Reinforcements will arrive soon. But this is your victory, Cade. Elias looked at the horizon, where the red sky was slowly fading into a calm orange glow from the setting twin suns. He felt the pride of a soldier, the relief of a survivor, and the spark of something more, a human being who had just outsmarted an entire alien fleet. And in that moment, he realized something. Humans weren't the strongest. They weren't the fastest or the most advanced. But in the face of impossible odds, they never gave up. The squad began their final preparations to leave. Elias stayed for one last look at the battlefield. The outpost still smoked. The ground still cracked, but it had survived. And in that survival, a message was written across the stars. Underestimate humanity at your own peril, Elias whispered to himself. Just before stepping onto the evac ship ramp, we might be weak, but we are never helpless. The aftermath of battle was a strange kind of silence. Outpost Corin still smoldered, blackened rock and twisted metal scattered across the volcanic plain. The air was thick with ash, and the acrid smell of plasma. Fire lingered like a ghost. Elias stepped off the dropship ramp, boots crunching over debris. His armor was scorched, his muscles still trembling from the effort of the fight. But inside, a quiet pride hummed through him. He had done more than survive. He had changed the tide of the battle. Captain Seer moved beside him, antennae slightly lowered in a gesture Elias had learned, indicated relief. The fleet has retreated, she said. We held the outpost. You, all of you, held it. Hithra hovered nearby, cleaning her rifle. I have to admit, she said, mandibles clicking softly. I didn't think humans could pull off something like this. Especially you. Elias managed a faint smile. I just did what made sense. Viren groaned as he leaned on his repeater, surveying the destruction. Sense is all well and good, he said, but guts. That's what matters in the end. And you had guts, human. The squad moved cautiously through the outpost, checking for remaining threats. Crumpled Drath drones littered the corridors, their armor shattered and sparking. The once pristine halls were blackened and scarred from the plasma blasts. The faint hum of the remaining power systems gave a lifeline to the towers, which still pulsed with energy. Elias paused before one of the primary control terminals. The display flickered, showing the status of the defense grid. Most towers were operational, some damaged but repairable. The pulse sequence he had set remained in place, a testament to his calculated risk. You did this, Seer said quietly, standing behind him. You made the call that saved the grid. You saved the outpost. Elias shook his head. We all did. I just noticed the pattern. Sear's antennae twitched again, and for the first time, Elias thought he saw genuine respect in her expression, a pattern no one else saw. That's very human. The squad gathered in the central courtyard, watching the horizon. The Drath fleet had retreated, smoke trails marking their departure. For the first time, the plains were quiet, except for the crackle of fires and the occasional shift of molten rock. VRRN let out a deep sigh. We'll need repairs, reinforcements, and maybe a miracle to fix this place fully. He gave Elias a crooked grin. And we'll need you again, human. Elias felt warmth rise in his chest. Not pride, not arrogance, something softer. Connection, respect, belonging. For weeks, he had felt like the weakest link, always behind, always doubted. Now, for the first time, he understood his place. Hithra leaned on her rifle, scanning the horizon. You didn't just save the outpost, she said. You proved something. Something everyone here underestimated. Humans adapt. We think in ways no one else does. You've shown us that. Elias looked at her, surprised. We, humans. That's what you mean. She nodded. Yes, you all. Her mandibles clicked again softly, almost like a smile. We fight differently. We risk differently. And sometimes, just sometimes, we surprise even ourselves. The sun dipped lower behind the twin peaks on the volcanic horizon. Its orange light reflected off the molten rivers, bathing the squad in a warm glow. For a moment, the scars of battle seemed to fade, replaced by quiet awe. Ilias's gaze shifted to the distant hills, where the Drath had fallen back. He thought of their ships, the overwhelming odds, the sheer terror of facing something so much larger, stronger, and more advanced. And yet, they had survived. Not through raw strength, not through advanced technology alone, but through thinking, timing, courage, and unity. Seer approached him again. Rest while you can. Repairs are coming, reinforcements will arrive, and the council